The recording studio on Kepler Station hummed quietly in the artificial night cycle. Dim blue lights cast long shadows across the metal walls, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a confession booth than an interview room. Veteran war correspondent Vekfar sat hunched over his equipment. 6 eyes focused intently on the massive figure across from him. General. Voxen was a sight that would haunt anyone's nightmares. Once, he had been the pride of the Zeltharian military, a towering warrior standing nearly 10 feet tall, with 6 powerful arms that could crush steel and chitinous armor that had deflected plasma fire from a dozen different worlds. Of those mighty limbs were gone, replaced by crude mechanical prosthetics that whirred and clicked with every movement. Deep burned scars crisscrossed his natural armor like a roadmap of pain, each mark telling a story of battles that should never have been fought. His remaining 3 arms trembled slightly as he reached for the water dispenser designed for his species. The liquid nutrition flowed through tubes directly into his system, but Thekvar noticed the general's feeding apparatus had been damaged. Everything about Voxen screamed of a warrior who had seen too much, fought too long, and paid a price that no victory could justify. "General, I want to thank you for agreeing to this interview," Thekvar began, his voice translator crackling with static. The device was old, like everything else on this forgotten station where broken veterans came to hide from their memories. Few survivors of the human war have been willing to speak publicly about what happened out there. Voxen remaining. Eyes only 4 of his original 6 still functioned, dimmed to the color of dying stars. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of entire worlds. "Survivors," he repeated slowly, as if tasting the word and finding it bitter. "Yes, that's what they call us in the medical reports. Though sometimes in the deep of night, when the nightmares come, I wonder if any of us truly survived what we saw in human space." The general's mandibles clicked together in a nervous rhythm that Thekvar recognized from his years covering wars across the galaxy. It was the sound of a predator who had learned to fear something worse than death. The Coalition's first contact with humanity seems almost innocent now. Looking back, Voxen continued, his mechanical limbs adjusting his position in the reinforced chair. Our long-range scouts had discovered this small blue world spinning. In the outer rim territories, far from the established trade routes and military corridors, the initial reports were underwhelming. Thekvar leaned forward, his recording equipment capturing every word. Every pause, every sound of metal grinding against metal as the general's prosthetics moved. What did those first reports say? Primitive species, Voxen's laugh was like grinding stone. Pedal mammals with soft pink skin, no natural armor, no claws worth mentioning, no enhanced strength or speed. They stood barely 6 feet tall on average, children compared to most Coalition species. Their bones were hollow and fragile, their skin could be pierced by the simplest weapons, and they seemed to require constant maintenance just to survive on their own world. The general paused, his good eyes staring at something beyond the walls of the station, beyond the present moment. Their technology was adequate, but unremarkable by galactic standards. Crude fusion reactors, basic plasma weapons, simple, faster-than-light drives that could barely push their ships beyond their own solar system. They had no energy shields, no gravitic weapons, no quantum computers. By every measure we used to evaluate potential threats, humans registered as barely above the intelligence threshold required for Coalition contact. So the military assumed they would be easy to conquer? Easy. Voxen's mandibles spread in what might have been a smile. On a creature capable of joy, we thought it would be like the Centauri annexation 15 cycles ago. Show of force, maybe some orbital bombardment of their military installations, and they would surrender within days. No species in recorded galactic history had ever resisted. The Coalition, for more than a few cycles once we demonstrated our technological superiority, the general's mechanical arm reached up to touch one of the deeper scars on his face, a burn that had clearly reached down to the bone. The Centaurians were warriors, proud and strong. They had energy shields, plasma cannons, ships that could travel between stars in hours instead of days. They lasted exactly 4 cycles before their government surrendered unconditionally. Altarians had quantum computers and AI servants. technology that impressed even our scientists. They negotiated surrender after only 2 cycles of fighting. But the humans were different?
Ow.
Different.
Ow.
The word hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Voxen's laugh was bitter, hollow. The sound of someone who had learned too late that the universe was far stranger and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. We had no word in our language for what they were, no concept that could capture the essence of what we encountered when we entered their space with conquest in our hearts. The general fell silent, his remaining eyes closing as if trying to shut out memories that refused to stay buried. In that silence, Dekvar could hear the station's life support systems humming, the distant sound of other broken veterans moving. Through corridors, something else, a sound like distant screaming that might have been just the wind through the station's damaged hull. When Voxen opened his eyes again, he held a light that might have been madness, or might have been the terrible clarity that comes from seeing truth too horrible to bear. We learned that some things in this universe should never be awakened. The Coalition's first target was a human colony world they designated Sector 7 Alpha. The humans called it New Sol. General Voxen had commanded the 3rd assault wave, expecting to find a broken enemy ready to surrender after the orbital bombardment had done its work. Instead, they found hell waiting for them with a smile. I remember stepping off the transport ship onto the landing pad, Voxen said, his mechanical fingers drumming against the table. The air smelled wrong. Not just smoke and destruction like we expected, but something else. Something that made my combat instincts scream warnings I didn't understand yet. The first 2 assault waves had reported light resistance and successful penetration of the outer defenses. Coalition Command had declared the operation 90% complete. All that remained was mopping up scattered survivors and establishing occupation zones. It should have been routine. The human commander was a female named Captain Yoon, Voxen continued, his voice growing quieter as the memories pulled him back to that cursed world. Our intelligence had identified her as a mid-level officer. Nothing special. Average height, average build, no genetic enhancements or cybernetic implants. She looked like she should have been teaching younglings, not commanding a military defense. But when Coalition forces breached the main defensive perimeter around New Sol's government district, they didn't find panic or surrender. Instead, Captain Yoon's voice echoed across the city through every speaker. Every communication device, every piece of technology capable of carrying sound. "Welcome to New Sol," her voice had said in perfect Coalition standard. "We've been waiting for you?" Then she activated something they called Protocol Phoenix. The entire city transformed in seconds, Voxen said, his remaining eyes widening at the memory. Every building, every street corner, every sewer tunnel, every underground passage had been rigged with explosives and automated defense systems. But not random explosives, carefully placed charges designed to channel our forces into predetermined kill zones. The humans had spent months turning their own home into a massive trap. Streets that looked clear suddenly erupted with hidden gun turrets. Buildings that seemed empty became automated fortresses. Even the civilian infrastructure had been weaponized. Water pipes filled with corrosive chemicals, electrical systems rigged to deliver deadly surges, transportation tunnels, converted into death mazes. But worse than the traps were the humans themselves. There was a soldier named Kong, Voxen said, his voice barely above a whisper. He held a critical choke point at the intersection of 3 major boulevards. Just one human, maybe 6 feet tall, couldn't have weighed more than 200 pounds. We sent a full squad to remove him, 12 Coalition warriors in powered armor. The battle for that single intersection lasted 6 hours. Kung took 17 direct plasma burns that should have killed any living creature instantly. His left arm was severed at the shoulder. His armor was destroyed. Half his face was melted away. But he kept fighting. He used his remaining arm to apply medical stims directly to his wounds while shooting at us with his other hand. Voxen continued. We watched him inject combat drugs into his own heart 3 times to keep himself conscious. When his rifle ran out of ammunition, he started throwing grenades. When those were gone, he used a pistol. When that failed, he picked up rocks and threw them with enough force to crack our visors. Coalition forces finally overwhelmed his position through sheer numbers, losing 8 of their 12 warriors in the process. But as the survivors approached to secure the area, Kang smiled through his ruined face and detonated a thermal charge he had been hiding against his own body. The explosion vaporized a city block, Voxen said. He chose to die rather than let us pass. Not because he was cornered or desperate, but because that was his job, his duty, his choice. The civilian population proved even more shocking. Coalition forces pushed deeper into the city. They encountered resistance from unexpected sources. Families with children fought alongside soldiers. Elderly humans who should have been in shelters led groups of teenagers in constructing improvised explosive devices from household chemicals. There was an old human named Park, Voxen said. He must have been 70 years old, walked with a cane, looked like he couldn't hurt a fly, but he had turned an entire school into a fortress. When we breached the walls, we found him teaching young humans how to make bombs from cleaning supplies and fertilizer. Coalition psychological warfare protocols had been perfected over centuries of conquest. Fear of death, fear of pain, fear for their offspring. These were universal constants that broke the will of every species they had encountered. Terror was a weapon more effective than any plasma cannon, but humans seemed to feed on fear itself. More desperate their situation became, the more dangerous they became, Voxen explained. When we cornered those children in the school, some couldn't have been more than 12 years old. They didn't cry or beg for mercy. They grabbed kitchen knives and glass bottles filled with burning chemicals and threw themselves at warriors. In powered armor, the young humans fought with a ferocity that defied every tactical manual in the Coalition library. They used their small size to crawl through ventilation systems and attack from impossible angles. They booby-trapped their own toys and school supplies. They sang songs while fighting, actual songs, as if dying in battle was something to celebrate. We had encountered brave species before, Voxen said. Warriors who fought with honor, soldiers who died for duty. But humans were something else entirely. They didn't just fight for survival. They fought for the right to choose how they died. The battle for New Sol lasted 3 months. Block by block, building by building, room by room, Coalition forces pushed through a city that had become a living weapon designed to kill them. Every victory came at a cost that made the next battle harder to justify. The Coalition eventually claimed the smoking ruins, but at a cost of 40% casualties, losses that were not just unheard for a primitive species engagement, but that bordered on military disaster. We won, Voxen said, his mandibles clicking in that nervous rhythm. We planted our flag on the rubble and claimed victory. But standing in those ruins, surrounded by the bodies of humans who had chosen death over surrender, we all knew the truth. He paused, his mechanical limbs adjusting his position as phantom pain from his missing arms made him wince. We hadn't conquered New Sol. We had simply survived it. The real nightmare began when humanity abandoned conventional warfare. Entirely after the devastating losses at New Sol and dozens of other colony worlds, the humans seemed to simply vanish. Coalition forces spread across human space found themselves occupying empty cities, patrolling silent streets, and controlling territory that felt more like a trap than a conquest. Then the Ghost War began. There was a human operative they called the Shadow of Busan, Voxen said, his mandibles clicking rapidly in the distinctive pattern that meant extreme distress among his species. Even after all these years, the memory could still trigger his combat reflexes. His real name was Agent Lim. For 2 years, he moved through our most secure installations like he was made of smoke and darkness. The clicking grew faster, almost frantic. Dekvar had seen this reaction before in other veterans, but never this severe. Whatever this Agent Lim had done, it had left scars deeper than plasma burns. The first time we encountered him, he had been captured during a raid on a human supply depot, Voxen continued. Standard interrogation protocols. We needed information about remaining human strongholds, weapons, caches, command structures. The session lasted for hours. Coalition interrogation techniques were designed to break any species without permanent physical damage. Pain induction. Sensory deprivation, chemical enhancement, methods perfected over centuries of dealing with stubborn prisoners. They had never failed to extract useful information. Agent Lim died on the table, Voxen said quietly. Complete cardiac and neural shutdown. Our medical scanners confirmed zero brain activity for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. We were preparing to dispose of the body when their rescue team struck. The human extraction team had somehow penetrated 3 layers of coalition security, bypassed automated defense systems, and reached the detention center without triggering a single alarm. They retrieved Lim's corpse and vanished back into the ruins of the city before coalition forces could respond. 2 days later, he killed Commander Zekdar in his own office. Voxen's remaining eyes closed as he relived the memory. Commander Zekdar had been a decorated veteran of 12 campaigns, protected by the most advanced security systems in the coalition military. His command bunker was buried 50 feet underground, surrounded by sensor arrays that could detect a heartbeat from a mile away. Moving through corridors that should have been impossible to navigate without authorization codes, he passed through 3 checkpoints, disabled for automated turrets, and entered Zekdar's office like he belonged there. The assassination took less than 30 seconds. Agent Lim appeared behind the commander's chair, eliminated him with a single precise strike, planted explosive charges throughout the facility, and disappeared through ventilation shafts too small for any coalition species to use. The entire command structure was destroyed, Voxen continued. 27 officers, irreplaceable tactical data, communication equipment worth more than most planets. He vanished like he was never there. But that was just the beginning. Agent Lim had returned from clinical death with something that terrified coalition forces more than any weapon. A complete disregard for his own survival that made him utterly unpredictable. He would appear in our command centers during staff meetings, eliminate key personnel with weapons he had constructed from office supplies, plant explosives made from cleaning chemicals, and vanish before our security teams could even sound the alarm. Coalition forces stationed entire battalions to hunt one human. They deployed their most advanced tracking technology, hired the galaxy's best mercenary hunters, and offered rewards that could buy star systems. Agent Lim not only evaded capture, but continued his operations with increasing boldness. Infiltrated our primary communication relay during a high-priority briefing with Coalition High Command, Voxen said. While we were receiving orders for the next phase of the campaign, he was in the same facility, uploading a virus that crashed our entire tactical network. The briefing was interrupted by footage of him waving at the security cameras. But Agent Lim wasn't unique. Across human space, similar operators were emerging from the shadows. Each one seemed to have their own specialized terror to inflict on coalition forces. There was a sniper they called Song who held up an entire armored division for 2 weeks from a bombed-out apartment complex. Coalition forces knew exactly where she was. Thermal imaging, sound detection, and orbital surveillance had pinpointed her location to a single room on the 15th floor. We bombarded that building with everything we had, Voxen said. Plasma artillery, kinetic bombardment, chemical weapons. That entire structure should have been reduced to dust. But every morning, our patrols would find dead sentries with precision. Headshots from that same building. Song had somehow survived bombardments that could level mountains. She had turned the ruins into a fortress that defied every law of physics and military strategy the coalition understood. When they finally overran her position, they found a tunnel system that extended for miles underground, with multiple escape routes and hidden weapon caches. She wasn't just surviving in that building, Voxen continued. She was living there, sleeping there, making it her home while killing our soldiers every single day. Then there was the demolitions expert they called Han, who turned coalition supply routes into death traps that claimed thousands of vehicles. He could make bombs from anything, metal scraps, organic waste, even coalition equipment that had been abandoned or captured. Our supply convoys started taking alternative routes, then alternative routes to the alternative routes, Voxen explained. It didn't matter. Han seemed to know where we were going before we did. Every road, every bridge, every tunnel became a potential killing ground. Psychological impact on Coalition troops was devastating. Soldiers who had conquered dozens of worlds without fear began jumping at shadows. Every piece of debris could be an explosive. Every abandoned building could hide a sniper. Every dead human might suddenly rise and attack. We started calling them ghost soldiers, Voxen admitted. Humans who should be dead but kept fighting. Our medical scanners were detecting something unprecedented, humans dying in combat, being revived by their field medics and returning to battle within hours. Coalition medical technology was advanced, but human biotechnology seemed to operate on different principles entirely. Their medics could restart hearts that had been stopped for minutes, repair brain damage that should have been permanent, and get critically wounded soldiers back into combat with treatments that seemed more like magic than medicine. Some humans had been clinically dead multiple times, Voxen continued. We captured one operative who had died and been revived 7 times during a single mission. Each time, he came back more dangerous than before. The ghost soldiers began appearing in Coalition nightmares. Warriors who had faced the terrors of a dozen different worlds started suffering from sleep disorders, panic attacks, and complete psychological breakdowns. They reported dreams of endless human faces, smiling as they advanced through impossible odds. How do you fight an enemy that treats death as a temporary inconvenience? Voxen asked, his voice barely audible. How do you maintain morale when your troops believe they're fighting creatures that cannot be killed? Coalition Command tried rotating fresh units into human space, but the Ghost War consumed them just as efficiently. Veterans warned newcomers about the humans who died and returned, but warning someone about an impossible enemy was like trying to describe color to the blind. We realized we weren't fighting a conventional resistance movement, Voxen said. We were fighting something that existed beyond our understanding of life and death itself. The Ghost War had transformed human space into a realm where Coalition forces were the hunted, and the humans had become something far more terrifying than any monster from the darkest corners of the galaxy. General Voxen, Scamposier finally, cracked like breaking glass when the interview reached Operation Final Storm. His mechanical limbs began to shake uncontrollably, and the lights in his remaining eyes flickered as if his neural system was struggling to process the memories. I need to tell you about New Daegu, he whispered, his massive frame trembling despite the reinforced chair designed to support his weight. It was supposed to be our final victory. Coalition High Command had grown tired of the Ghost War, tired of losing entire battalions to shadows and phantoms. They wanted one decisive action that would break human morale forever. Dagvar noticed that the general's translator was crackling more frequently now, as if the emotional stress was interfering with the technology. The veteran correspondent had interviewed thousands of soldiers across hundreds of conflicts, but he had never seen a warrior this thoroughly broken by memory alone. Intelligence had located a major human refugee center hidden in an underground complex on a world they called New Daegu. Voxen continued. Our analysts estimated it held several thousand non-combatants' families fleeing the fighting, wounded civilians, elderly humans, and many younglings. The coalition leadership believed that if we could capture them, we could finally force the human military to negotiate. Operation Final Storm was designed to be overwhelming and decisive. 3 full battle groups, over 50,000 coalition warriors, orbital bombardment platforms, and siege equipment capable of cracking planetary crusts. The largest military operation in the human war, all focused on one underground facility. I was assigned to lead the ground assault, Voxen said, his voice growing quieter with each word. My orders were clear: surround the facility, demand surrender, and use the civilians as leverage to force human military commanders to end their resistance. It should have been simple. Textbook hostage negotiation. Coalition forces had surrounded the refugee center within hours. Their sensors detected massive life signs underground. Thousands of humans crowded into what appeared to be a converted mining facility. Perfect conditions for a surrender ultimatum. The human spokesperson was a young female named Dr. Kim. Voxen continued. She appeared at the main entrance wearing medical scrubs stained with blood from treating wounded civilians. She looked tired, scared, exactly what you would expect from someone caring for refugees in an impossible situation. Dr. Kim had requested a face-to-face meeting with coalition commanders. She was small, even by human standards, maybe 5.5 feet tall, with dark hair tied back and eyes that seemed older than her face. She carried no weapons, wore no armor, and moved with the careful precision of someone who had been working without sleep for days. She asked for 1 hour to consider our terms, Voxen said. 1 hour to discuss the surrender with the civilian leadership. Seemed reasonable, humanitarian even. Thought we were finally dealing with sensible humans who understood the reality of their situation. But during that hour, coalition intelligence intercepted human communications from inside the facility. What they heard changed everything. They weren't discussing surrender terms or negotiating conditions. Voxen's voice cracked. They were saying goodbye. Parents were recording final messages for children who weren't with them. Elderly humans were sharing stories about their lives. Medical staff were distributing what they called comfort medication to the youngest refugees. The intercepted communications revealed the true nature of the human response. Families were gathering together, holding hands, singing songs that sounded like lullabies. Medical personnel were moving through the crowds, checking on everyone, making sure no one was alone. Children were drawing pictures and writing letters they would never send. We realized they were preparing to die, Voxen said. All of them together, by choice. When the deadline passed, Dr. Kim appeared at the entrance again. But this time, she was holding a young human child, a little girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with the same dark hair and serious eyes as the doctor. The child was her own offspring, Voxen whispered. Her daughter, and she was smiling. Both of them were smiling as they faced an army that could have wiped out their entire species. Dr. Kim looked directly at General Voxen, her voice carrying clearly across the space between them as she spoke in perfect coalition standard. We choose freedom. The words hung in the air for a moment that felt like eternity. Then the ground beneath the coalition forces began to shake. The humans had turned their entire shelter into a massive bomb, Voxen said, his mechanical fingers gripping the table so hard that metal began to bend. Not just explosives, but some kind of fusion device that used the facility's power core. The explosion vaporized 3 city blocks and sent shockwaves that could be felt from orbit. The blast killed 2/3 of Voxen's assault force instantly. The general himself was caught in the outer edge of the explosion, his body shredded by debris and radiation. Coalition medical teams found him dying in a crater that had once been a street. His natural armor cracked like broken pottery, 3 of his limbs completely severed. I died for 6 minutes, Voxen said quietly. Complete system shutdown. It's no brain activity, no heartbeat, no neural response. The medical team brought me back using emergency revival protocols, but the damage was permanent. When I woke up, I was more machine than warrior. But the physical injuries were nothing compared to what the incident did to coalition morale. The humans had chosen collective suicide rather than surrender. Not just the fighters, not just the soldiers, but entire families. Thousands of civilians, including children, had made the conscious decision to die rather than live under coalition rule. They chose extinction over defeat, Voxen said, his voice barely audible. The entire population, families, younglings, elderly, wounded, chose death over surrender. What kind of species does that? What kind of creatures value freedom more than life itself? The psychological impact rippled through coalition forces like a plague. Soldiers who had conquered dozens of worlds without hesitation began requesting transfers away from human space. Others suffered complete psychological collapse, unable to process the idea of an enemy that would rather die than be conquered. Our military psychologists identified a new condition, Voxen continued. They called it human combat syndrome. Warriors who had fought humans experienced persistent nightmares, panic attacks, and complete inability to function in combat situations. They reported dreams of endless waves of smiling human faces advancing through impossible odds, choosing death over surrender again and again. Coalition medical facilities filled with veterans who could no longer sleep, could no longer fight, could no longer exist without seeing those final moments when Dr. Kim and her daughter chose freedom over life. Some warriors requested memory, modification procedures. Others simply refused to leave their quarters. The incident broke something fundamental in our military psychology, Voxen admitted. We had always believed that survival was the ultimate motivation, that any species could be conquered if you threatened their existence. But humans had proven that some things mattered more than survival. The Ghost War had been terrifying because humans seemed impossible to kill. But New Daegu was worse because it proved that humans could choose death as easily as they chose life. And that choice made them more dangerous than any weapon in the galaxy. We realized we weren't fighting a conventional enemy, Voxen said, his remaining eyes closing as if trying to shut out the memories. We were fighting a species that had weaponized the concept of sacrifice itself. How do you conquer people who consider death a victory if it's death on their own terms? Operation Final Storm had been designed to break human resistance. Instead, it broke the Coalition's will to continue fighting. The image of Dr. Kim and her daughter, smiling as they chose freedom over life, became a symbol that haunted every Coalition warrior who had witnessed the human war. After New Daegu, we knew the truth, Voxen whispered. We weren't the conquerors anymore. We were the ones being conquered by an idea we couldn't fight, couldn't kill, and couldn't understand. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the general's mechanical limbs adjusting position. A constant reminder of the price paid for underestimating the species that chose death over defeat. The interview's final segment would reveal the classified intelligence that ended the human war forever. The Gvar could see that General Voxen was preparing to share information that had been buried in the deepest vaults of Coalition command for decades. The general's remaining eyes flickered with the weight of secrets that had haunted him every night since the war ended. Coalition intelligence made a discovery that changed everything, Voxen began, his voice carrying the gravity of someone about to reveal the universe's most terrifying secret. We learned that the humans we'd been fighting, the ghost soldiers who gave us nightmares, the civilians who chose death over surrender, the resistance fighters who broke our armies, all of them represented less than 3% of their species' actual military capability. The words hit Thekfar like a physical blow. 3%. Everything they had witnessed, every impossible victory, every terrifying display of human determination had been just a fraction of what the species could actually do. The revelation came from intercepted human communications during the siege of New Incheon, Voxen continued. Our cryptographers had finally cracked one of their military encryption codes after months of work. What we found in those communications wasn't tactical data or troop movements. It was references to something called Full War Protocol military, assets that humanity had deliberately kept in reserve. Coalition intelligence officers had initially dismissed the intercepted messages as propaganda or disinformation. The capabilities described seemed impossible, even for a species that had already defied every law of warfare the galaxy understood. But as more communications were decoded, a horrifying picture began to emerge. We caught glimpses of what they were holding back. Voxen's voice grew hollow, as if speaking the words physically drained him. Orbital bombardment platforms that could crack continental plates with a single shot. AI systems so advanced they could infiltrate and control any technology we possessed, turning our own weapons against us. Bioweapons designed to target specific genetic markers. They could have wiped out entire Coalition species without harming a single human. The intercepted data revealed weapons that operated on principles Coalition science couldn't comprehend. Gravity bombs that could collapse star systems. Nanotechnology that could reprogram matter at the atomic level. Energy weapons that drew power directly from dimensional rifts. Each piece of intelligence painted a picture of a species whose true military power dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. But the most terrifying discovery was why they weren't using these weapons, Voxen said. The humans had made a deliberate choice to fight with conventional arms to minimize collateral damage to their own civilian population. They were willing to lose worlds, to watch their people die, rather than unleash their full capability and risk harming innocents. A surviving human commander named General Park was captured during the final battles on New Incheon. Coalition. Interrogators expected to extract information about remaining human strongholds or weapon caches. Instead, they uncovered the most chilling truth in galactic history. General Park revealed that humanity had been treating our invasion as what they called a limited engagement, Voxen whispered. They had protocols for total warfare that would make everything we had witnessed look like children playing with toys. Under interrogation, General Park had seemed almost relieved to finally speak the truth. He described human military doctrine with the calm precision of someone discussing weather patterns, completely unaware that every word was driving Coalition intelligence officers to the edge of psychological collapse. He showed us tactical simulations, Voxen said, his mechanical limbs trembling at the memory. Humans operating under full war protocol didn't just fight wars, they became war incarnate. They could turn entire solar systems into weapons, reprogram enemy genetics to eliminate threats, and fight battles across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The simulations revealed capabilities that violated fundamental laws of physics. Humans who could exist in quantum superposition, fighting in multiple realities at once. Time manipulation weapons that could trap enemies in temporal loops. Consciousness. Transfer technology that made death truly meaningless for their military forces. One simulation showed a single human battalion eliminating a galaxy-spanning civilization in 72 hours. Voxen continued. Not through massive fleets or planet-killing weapons, but by rewriting the laws of physics in local space. They could make gravity flow backward, turn vacuum into solid matter, or simply delete enemy species from existence. But the most horrifying revelation was that these weren't theoretical weapons. They existed, fully functional, waiting in hidden facilities throughout human space. Humanity had the power to end the coalition instantly, and they had chosen not to use it. General Park explained their reasoning with the kind of casual certainty that made our interrogators request psychiatric evaluation, Voxen said. He told us that humanity viewed total warfare as a failure of imagination. He preferred to find creative solutions that preserved life whenever possible. Coalition High Command received the intelligence reports in complete silence. For the first time in galactic history, they faced an enemy that possessed the power to destroy them utterly, but chose mercy instead. The realization was more terrifying than any weapon. Within 6 months, we began withdrawal from human space, Voxen admitted. Officially, Command cited strategic repositioning and resource reallocation. Privately, they acknowledged that we faced potential extinction if humanity decided to stop holding back. The withdrawal was unprecedented in Coalition history. No enemy had ever forced them to retreat through the threat of unused power. Military analysts struggled to comprehend an adversary that won through restraint rather than overwhelming force. Didn't retreat because we were defeated in battle, General Voxen concluded, his scarred face reflecting decades of haunted memories. We retreated because we realized we were fighting a species that viewed our total annihilation as a tactical option they were choosing not to exercise. The humans we fought, the ghost soldiers, the suicide bombers, the impossible warriors, they were humanity's mercy. He paused, his remaining eyes focusing on something beyond the walls of the station. Beyond the present moment, perhaps seeing the simulations that had broken Coalition resolve, they're true warriors, the ones operating under full war protocol. Those are the ones we never want to meet. The recording equipment captured every word, every pause, every sound of mechanical limbs adjusting position as the weight of revelation settled over the interview room. Humans don't just survive war, Voxen said, his voice carrying across space and time like a warning to future generations. They become something beyond war itself, something beautiful and terrible that should be left sleeping. Vekvar deactivated his recording equipment with hands that trembled slightly. He knew this interview would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. The species they had dismissed as primitive mammals had revealed themselves as the most dangerous. Force in known space, not through malice or aggression, but through their infinite capacity for sacrifice and their terrifying restraint in choosing not to use their full power. As General Voxen was helped from the interview room by medical attendants, his final words echoed in the silence. We woke something that chose to let us live. I pray to whatever gods watch over this galaxy that no one is ever foolish enough to wake it again. The universe had learned a new kind of fear, not the fear of being destroyed, but the fear of being spared by something that could end everything with a thought. The end.